Hello and welcome, I'm Raziel, and so it is Law Day. Even though, last week's was incredibly late, this one is actually on time. Surprisingly, keeping to a schedule. And today, we're going to the Wild West again to talk about the Hex. The Hex is quite interesting, to be honest with you. And in this video, where I shall explain as poorly as I can what the Hex is, their story and their timeline, and everything else in between, I think this would be quite interesting, actually, because I think the Hex is one of the most interesting factions in any game. They're not my favourite faction in Wild West Exodus, don't get me wrong, still belongs to the Watchers and the Warrior Nations. Now, what is the Hex? Well, the Hex is a big pink, purple space fart. Yes, that's what it is. This is an amoebus, gaseous cloud that flies around space, doing nothing much else, because, space is pretty empty. Yeah, like really, really empty. And so this big space cloud is just floating around doing not bloody much, to be honest with you, until it hits a planet with life on it. See, when it hits a planet with life on it, it decides that it's going to possess the more sentient creatures and warps them into things with more tentacles and brain cells, and makes really horrible monsters out of them. This isn't completely deliberate per se. It's not something that they go, hey, I'm just going to do this because lol, it's funny, I'm going to do this for the giggles. No. This does it just because it is a defense mechanism for itself to survive on a planet, because obviously the creatures of the planet are adapted and evolved to survive on a planet. So it's just so it can survive on the planet, and it tends to take planets over as doing this, and sort of links all the sentient creatures to this one big pink fart, which is the Hex, and that's what it does. Now, the thing about the Hex is, like I said, this is more or less a defense mechanism. It's not something it goes out its way to do it, just to survive on the planet. And yeah, it kind of brings peace, because everything is now connected by the Hex. And you can't lie when you are possessed by the Hex to someone else. You have very little free will, and yeah, you get peace, but it's probably at too much of a cost, to be honest. With myself, it's very high cost to lose your free will to something like this. Now, when it got to Earth, because it did get to Earth, it was way back in the time of Atlantia, or for everyone else, Atlantis. And of course, this involved the Watchers too. So basically, what happened? It got to the Earth, and then the Watchers got to the Earth because stuff happened. See, when the Hex takes over, it can also make the people really intelligent and teach them how to create weapons. Okay, and the way the Watchers work, they kind of look at the technological evolution of a planet, and if it's too far ahead, they start to question stuff. So the Hex gave the Atlanteans these very good weapons, very, very posh weapons. But with that, the Order of the All-Shard was also following the Hex, because they somehow got this massive hard-on to kill the Hex. That's just like their goal. The goal of the Order of the All-Shard is to kill the Hex, nothing more, nothing less. They will destroy a planet, hoping they have got rid of the Hex for the entire forever, like extinct. They just want it dead. So, well, the Hex is just going around. It's also kind of running away from the Order at the same time. So now we have this kind of thing happening on Earth, but the Hex kind of didn't start really helping out the humans. That was more or less the Order. The Order did most of it, but some of them got possessed and by the Hex as well. So there's this kind of war going on, and when the Watchers come down, they get stuck, and then the Hex starts to possess them to give them the edge in this war against the Order of the All-Shard. And that is how they got discovered. That's how the Hex got discovered by the Watchers, because they possessed one of the major Ceruleans. I believe it was one of the Ceruleans that had infiltrated Earth. Ceruleans being able to, change shape, etc. And yeah, and when the Watchers came back, they discovered that the Cerulean, who was no longer, looking like a human, but more like something out of hentai, they sort of questioning what was happening here, and the Watchers got murdered by their kin, who were now and humans who were now possessed by the Hex. Now, let's scoot forward to, well, modern times of the Wild West Exodus, the current timeline we are in the dystopian age. See, now what's happened is we've got some balmy scientists called the Enlightened who have also discovered the Hex. Now, where they discovered it, how they discovered it, and why, we do not know. Well, we do know why, because they're a bunch of nosy assholes who just want to stick their nose in where they shouldn't, and especially when it comes to big purple space farts that act as a parasite. And they started using it to create power. Not as in, like, ultimate power. Like, he used it as a power source in this RJ and 3 digits. RJ177, I don't know. Well, I should know, but, you know, this is a less than serious video, so take it as you wish. And so they started using the Hex as a literal power source, and with this power source being used by the Hex, it was kind of interesting because now they managed to gain power themselves. And the weirdest thing is, now there's this place in Antarctica called the Vault. Now I know this sounds weird because no one knows what's in the vault except a big fish called sturgeon. No, just sturgeon, he's not a fish. And outside the hole is these crystallized these purple pinkish crystals. And this is where the RJ 3 digits come from. This is literally where the power source comes from. It's from these crystals. And this is what they managed to use. And this is basically crystallized Hex. Probably because it's very cold in the Antarctic, and this is how it finds itself to survive in said frigid conditions. So that's basically the Hex for you. And the last thing, when they do possess people, and it depends on how willing they are to be possessed, or how willing they are to use the Hex, depends on how powerful they are, or how powerful they can become. Look at the witch doctor Lebu. Okay, she has 2 models. They both look cool, but the big one is basically Ursula from The Little Mermaid, but with more teeth and probably more tentacles, to be honest with you, and more nipples. So basically, nothing like Ursula, just she's a big octopus with lots of teeth. Sort of thing you would see in your nightmares. And because she willingly accepted the Hex and uses the Hex as a power, and the Hex does this as well. Those who are more willing to absorb the Hex, use it, they will use them to lead and gather more people to possess, absorb, and change as well. So they get some really strong players there, and that's it. And the thing is, this lust for power is such a human trait that even the best character wasn't immune. We have my favourite, my girl, Walks Looking. She, in her lust for power, actually got possessed by the Hex and had her soul taken. And after a ritual, she had half her soul replaced, and now she's looking for it. And that was all because the Hex turned her into this this monster with wings and still blind apparently, called it's a Scrabble winner. It's like Wichata or something like that. Jeez, I'm not pronouncing that word. It is very difficult to pronounce, and I don't want to brutalize or upset an entire culture because I ruined one of their words. You know, the Hex. And yeah, so it's really smart. It's a smart space fart which goes around possessing people. It looks at people who really want power, sort of strives them to them, and that's it. And it gets more people and more sentient creatures towards the people who are willing to accept the Hex for power to guide them in the future as well. And I think this is really interesting. And with all that, it's still running from the Order. Now, I think it's kind of interesting, to be honest with you. The final part of the Hex is I got mentioned the Empire here. Now, the Empire uses the Hex in a completely different way. They have not accepted the willingness or the power that the Hex provides. They kind of use it as a way to communicate between leaders. Even the Enlightened do this too. And while they're using the Hex to communicate telepathically, they cannot lie. They cannot be false in anything they say. So it breeds a form of peace between the leaders of the Empire. There happens to be one person who can actually lie while using this system to communicate. That is a Burson Carpavian of the Enlightened. And how? No one knows. Why? Because he's Burson Carpavian. And it's kind of cool. And like I said, the Hex. There you go. There is the Hex, poorly explained, as always. And I'll see you in the next one. And if you want to get into Wild West Exodus, which I very much think you should, because it's a fantastic game with some really good looking models, the Hex have some of the best. Go down to where the game is down below for up to 20% off your wargaming and free delivery up to £20 and look up to 20% off. Okay, Wild West Exodus isn't included unfortunately, and free delivery up to £20. And there is the point system with an extra 1% off, which actually does work on the Wild West Exodus. Then there is Forbidden Planet, comic activities, mangas, etc. There is also my merchandise, my comics, my t-shirts, my cups, all of it. All the artwork's done by me, everything's done by me, all done by hand for the comics, and some digital art, which I did because I was bored as well. There is Skyforge, don't forget Skyforge, a good friend of mine. As always, let's get him about that Google algorithm. And finally, Patreon because business. Bye-bye.